We're going to talk about money today, specifically what America spends on its defense. Our guest is Senator Roger Wicker, who's the top Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And he argues that what we spend today, about 3% of America's economic output, is provocatively low compared to what we spent during the Cold War, a period that looks more and more comparable with every passing day. Let's get into it.
It is a prescription for war, this Iraqi invasion of Kuwait.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
The bloody experience of Vietnam is to end in a stalemate.
We continue to face a grave situation in Iran.
The people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender.
For maps, videos, and images, follow us on Instagram, and also feel free to follow me on Twitter at Aaron B. McLean. Hi, I'm Aaron McLean. Thanks for joining School of War. I'm delighted to welcome to the show today Roger Wicker, who has represented Mississippi in the United States Senate since December 2007. He's had a career in public service before that. And where I'd like to start, Senator, is some time ago, you served on active duty in the Air Force. You transitioned over to the reserves, retired as a lieutenant colonel in 2004. How'd you find yourself in the Air Force? How do those experiences inform your thinking about defense policy and what you do today?
Well, thanks for having me on, Aaron. We have a tradition of military service in my family going back several generations. My grandfather was in World War I. My father was in World War II. I attended Ole Miss on an Air Force ROTC scholarship and got my commission there. Went to law school, and I spent my 4 years active duty actually in the JAG department. And after 4 years, I got out of active duty, went to work for Senator Trent Lott in Washington, D.C. back when he was a House member, and stayed in the reserve in various capacities. So it was, I have to say, I didn't do anything particularly special, but I did everything they asked me to do, and I was proud to serve. And my son is an Air Force major right now, so he's continuing the tradition.
Well, good luck to him. So it's obvious, as you know, it's less and less common for folks in D.C. to include very senior people with important defense policy responsibilities to actually have experience in uniform. Is there anything from your experience in uniform that informs how you think about any particular issue that you work on today?
Absolutely. There's no question about it. You know, having been at an operational base back in the days of the Strategic Air Command, I knew pilots who flew the bombers and also the tankers. And then we had a tactical air command wing with 3 fighter squadrons back. So, you know, to having been at an operational base and seen how everybody works together to get the mission done is invaluable. And you're right, we have fewer members of Congress that have served in the military now. And, you know, part of that is because it's an all-volunteer force, and we pay our troops a good enough wage that at least it's something they can manage to live on. I don't think we do quite as well as we ought to, but as long as we have a volunteer force, we're going to have people in there that want to serve and understand what it is to step forward and risk their lives and safety and freedom to make America great.
So, Senator, you are the ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, which puts you
Right.
really at the center of any number of critical debates about the future of American national security and defense policy. And you have just released a report that I commend to all listeners, whether that listener is a in the weeds policy wonk or just someone with a general interest in American security, which I assume every listener is. It's called 21st Century Peace Through Strength, a generational investment in the U.S. military. And I'm going to very briefly sum up the main point. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Good.
The case for it. So we're around 3% GDP defense spending today here in the United States of America. It's a lot of money.
Just a little less than that, actually.
Just a little less.
2.9. Yep.
Roger, you argue, sir, that we should spend 5%, which is really a lot of money. Why?
Well, I take advice from the people who know what they're talking about, including people who've done it before and people who are doing it now. Secretary Gates, who served in 2 administrations, one Republican and one Democrat, had a meal with me some 2 years ago, and he said we need to move back to 5%. And so I've been actually working with that in mind for quite a time. Now that I have a staff that's part of the leadership, I had enough technical help to actually put that on paper. But listen, there's no question that we're in a very dangerous time. You can ask the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he will say we have not had such a dangerous military situation, such a threat to the United States since World War II. You can ask the Secretary of Defense, who's part of the Biden administration. He'll say the same thing. Talk to the top 4-star in the Indo-Pacific, and that 4-star will tell you we are very much at risk and we're not ready for what might become a two-theater war. And then again, you go over to the Middle East and again, talk to the top 4-star there for the United States of America. And again, they will say, this is something like we haven't seen in decades and decades. And we are not prepared for the threat that comes from what I call in my report, the axis of aggressors. And of course, that chief among them are Communist China, with Xi Jinping having told his Congress that they need to be ready to retake Taiwan by 2027. Well, that's right around the corner. You know, when the Japanese attacked us at Pearl Harbor, at least it was a surprise attack. We had the signals there, but here is the dictator of the most populous country in the world and the most militaristic in terms of adding to their weaponry. And he says, I want to be ready to retake Taiwan by a year certain. And then you add to that Russia with their illegal war crimes of invading their neighbor, something that threatens a 70-year-old rules-based Europe, and Iran, and all of their three proxies, at least their three proxies, which are raining havoc and doing so even as we speak, even as we do this interview. And add to that a person who probably is not very well balanced, and that's the dictator of North Korea. So it's a 4-pronged axis of aggressors that we simply are not prepared to fight. We had moved when I was in the service to being able to say we can win a 2-theater conflict at the same time. We're now in a position of trying to say we could win a 1-theater conflict. Actually, we're threatened from 4 different directions.
So there's a line of criticism for the defense buildup that you propose that I'll articulate, and then I want to solicit your response to it. And it would run something like this: that while 5% may get us important capabilities, it's going to take us a long, even if we implemented everything in your plan, sir, it would take us a long time to get there. So that leaves a pretty good window between now and then, even if we do get there. And in that window, a lot of bad things can happen. And in order to survive in that window, we need to prioritize. This is the key word of this line of argument. We need to prioritize. And what that means in practice, it seems, is to tell the Chinese we mean business over some elements of our security posture in the Pacific. And we got to tell the Europeans and potentially the Israelis and our friends in the Middle East, you guys are just not exactly on your own, but you need to figure some things out for yourself, because we're going to focus on China and kind of leave other things to take care of themselves as best as you can make it work. And that's necessary. That to say anything other than that is essentially unstrategic. That's a powerful argument right now. You probably encounter it from time to time in the Senate. I'm curious to know your response to it.
Well, getting to 5% will take a few years, and I allow for that in my plan, 5 to 7 years. What we need to do in the first year is an increase of far less than that. Some $55 billion is what I advocate. I was able on a bipartisan basis to get the Armed Services Committee in the Senate to go $25 billion. But that's only half of what we need for the first year. But clearly, we can take some time to do that. But let me tell you, as we're talking about the idea of concentrating on the Indo-Pacific, let me tell you, the best money spent to counter what Xi Jinping and Kim Jong-un might do in the Indo-Pacific is for our allies in NATO and our friends in Ukraine to actually win and run the Russians out of Ukraine. And honestly, this can be done by an indigenous group of folks in Ukraine, like the Ukrainian army right now. They have surprised everyone. Most of the people that were experts, both in the media and in the military and in the administration, said the Russians will be in charge of the capital city of Ukraine within 2 or 3 days. Well, it's been 2.5 years, and we now see Ukrainian troops taking Russian territory in the northern part, a total surprise to the allies, to the people I've been talking to in the administration, and also to the Russians. So if if Xi Jinping and Kim Jong Un see success on the part of the democratic rule of law forces in Europe, they will think not only twice, but several times before they try to do anything foolish and and start a war and a conflict in the Indo-Pacific. So I do think it's wrong to try to take these conflicts or these potential areas of conflict separately. I hear that argument, but honestly, I think Vladimir Putin saw the debacle that the United States and our allies experienced when we just abandoned our friends in Afghanistan. And we lost troops, and actually, those are the first casualties we had had in years. We're trying to evacuate and left all of our equipment over there. But also, we sent the signal to the world that the United States is capable of abandoning a promise to a friend. And that's a terrible signal to send. When Ukraine did away with their nuclear weapons, we made them a promise. And the civilized countries of the world, including NATO, made them a promise. If you give up your nuclear weapons, which you ought to do, we'll be there for you if something happens. Russia decided to invade their neighbor, and thank goodness NATO is there for them, and thank goodness we're helping them with arms and ammunition, which is what we should be doing.
At the risk of getting a little bit into the technical side of things, how do you think about how the Pentagon buys stuff? That is to say, if you write the Pentagon larger and larger checks, it seems like we have some troubles in the process of acquisitions, and then we have some troubles in the industrial base that's producing the things we might buy. So more money in and of itself, I realize I'm not telling you anything you don't know, is not the solution. How do we, what are the problems, the biggest problems as you see them, and how do you propose fixing them?
Well, more money in itself is certainly not the solution. The solution is more weapons and more advanced weaponry and better ammunition. That's what we need. So if anybody wants to try to make the case that the federal government has ever done anything absolutely efficiently, then I don't know who they'll get to take them on in that argument. Certainly, the Defense Department is the biggest department in the federal government, and the federal government makes poor decisions quite often when it comes to spending money. We are making improvements, but that's not to say we don't need more weaponry and more ammunition and better ships and more ships and more and a better life and quality of life for our troops. So one thing that we are insisting on now, and it's something that has worked in the past, but should work better if we do it on scale, is multi-year contracts. We know that we're going to need more than one littoral combat ship, or the amphibious troop transporting ships. We know we're going to need more and more of those. And so why not do a multi-year contract, a block buy, and say we're going to build 3 of them the same way, the exact same formula and the exact same model, like the automobile manufacturers do. So that's one thing, and it can save us a lot of money, and we are doing better in that regard. But also we've let our manufacturing plants shrink to a level that they're not capable of giving us what we need. We need more shipyards. We just don't have the capacity that China has. This is going to be a statistic that will shock you. China has over 200 times the military shipbuilding capacity as the United States, and they added 100 ships last year. We went backwards. Our fleet is is 2 ships below what we had the year before. So not only is it bad, and not only is it headed in the wrong direction, but China is in a position, because they're a dictatorship and because they don't take care of their people as well as we do, and their retirees and their elderly folks and their children. Because of that, they can spend a ton more money on a military buildup, and they've decided to do that.
Yeah, I do kind of wonder about the economics there. This is not covered in your report. We don't have to talk about it, but I do wonder at some point how the economic picture for them continues to make sense. I wonder at what point they start running into sort of Soviet Union style issues in the direction that Xi is taking them.
Well, let's just say in a sentence, and we won't get off on that, but there are real troubling signs inside China's economy, and yes, a Marxist approach to creating jobs and providing opportunity for your people has shown that it doesn't work, and it's not going to work long term in China. But they do have a ton of money now to put into not only the conventional war fighting and their army, but also into their nuclear program, which is
Right.
something we have to worry about.
Well, so I want to talk about both ships and then nukes. I mean, you've been a leader on this for a long time now. You're from Mississippi, obviously a lot of important work in terms of the nation's naval defense industrial base is there in Mississippi. Not having munitions is a big problem, but producing more munitions as problems go is a problem that you can think about solving, given the will, given the resources in a tighter timeline than a problem of not enough shipyards. I mean, that strikes me as an enormously complicated, burdensome issue to tackle. How do we get more? Because as you know, I mean, in a protracted scenario in the Pacific, we can talk all we want about a 357 ship Navy, but that number is going to start going down quickly in the first days of that conflict. How do you think about it, sir?
Well, the reason that we say 355 is what's in the statute now is because that's what the admirals and generals and people who will be in charge of defending ourselves, should we have a conflict, tell us that we need. So actually, they gave us a very detailed and complex mix of small and large ships, and that's how we came up with that number. But you don't ever get anything done if you don't get started. And one of the arguments that I've had over the past year is, well, there's no reason for us to authorize more ships. We don't have enough shipyards. Well, let's get some more shipyards and get going on it. That's the answer. But let's don't throw up our hands in despair and let the current lack of manufacturing capacity stop us from doing what we need to defend ourselves. And to their credit, after I really pressed the administration over this past year to add to our shipbuilding industrial base, they agreed to add to the supplemental bill $3.4 billion. But you mentioned Mississippi, and I won't take long on this, but we do have a lot of states where they have shipyards. This includes California, it includes the Great Lake Midwest, as well as the Gulf and the Atlantic Ocean. What people don't spend as much time learning about is that really over 40 of our states participate in manufacturing the components of our submarines and our warfighting ships. So it's not just a few shipyards in a few states. It's really a massive effort on behalf of most of the states. And it's good for national defense and national security. And it also creates jobs in almost all of our states.
So on nuclear weapons and the strategic deterrent, I don't think a lot of people. I don't think the average person who cares about America's national security, but who doesn't think about nuclear issues with a lot of their time, actually appreciates why the emergence of this substantial Chinese nuclear arsenal, why it affects our thinking about future acquisitions and the nature of our nuclear arsenal. That is to say, I think it's a pretty common opinion out there that, well, we have a lot of nuclear weapons. We have a lot of nuclear weapons to destroy just a lot of stuff out there designed to deal originally with the Soviet, now Russian threat. So what if the Chinese get some more, we've got a lot. Why do we need to modernize? Why do we need potentially more? And, it's a delicate issue to discuss, just in staying on the unclassified side of things. Like, why does the emergence of China as a nuclear power affect our thinking in terms of what we're getting? How does that actually work, sir?
Okay, well, the good thing about it is that we're not practicing getting under desks at schools anymore, and we're not encouraging homeowners to build fallout shelters like they did when I was a boy, when your parents were barely here on this earth. But we've got some of the best minds in the world that we've asked to think about this and tell us what we need. And the most recent product out of a totally bipartisan commission was the Nuclear Posture Commission, which came out just last year. The recommend and really honestly, people from every end of the ideological spectrum came out and said our nuclear weapons are old. They're over half a century old, and eventually things wear out and they need to be replenished. But also, I'm glad to report to you that in addition to what they recommended on refurbishing our nuclear weapons, they talk about a sort of a nuclear shield, and I've heard President Trump talking about this in his campaign. You know, he admires the Iron Dome that Israel has, and of course, that Iron Dome principally shoots down the conventional weapons. We're a much bigger country by an order of magnitude, but the president is interested in some sort of nuclear shield, and and frankly, this commission says that's a good idea. They did it separate and apart from any presidential campaign, but there are recommendations that they can make, particularly because of our capability in space now and the capability of our enemies in space that can give us an added layer of defense and protection. And again, it's all in a recommendation by a scholarly commission appointed by Democrats and Republicans at the highest level in this government. And we ought to pay attention to what they recommend.
Yeah. Just to editorialize for a moment myself, I mean, for a long time, the folks who are opposed to missile defense, I mean, a core of their argument is it just can't work. Can't work at scale. You can hardly shoot down a bullet with a bullet. Well, try doing a 500 bullets. It's just not going to happen. And I feel like that argument had to have been finally laid to rest back in April when the Israeli,
Right.
along with us and Arab partners and, a lot of folks, really successfully defeated a very substantial missile attack that was occurring with different kinds of systems at different altitudes simultaneously and just defeated it. Defeated.
And in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan said, "Yes, we can do that. We could, if we put our minds to it with the brightest scientific minds, we can absolutely do that." And he was right. And we can still make scientific discoveries about how to do that better.
Last question, sir. I want to be respectful of your time. If you'll indulge me about the Marine Corps, I'm a Marine. We got a lot of Marines listening to the show. You
Good
talk
for you.
about Force Design 2030 in the report. This, as you know, has been a hotly contested, controversial issue in the Marines. Has the Marine Corps basically gotten it right in the last few years in the direction it's been driving in terms of preparing for war in the Pacific?
Based on everything I've heard, the answer to me is yes. And again, if we don't have confidence in the people we put in office, then we ought to switch them out. But I have a lot of confidence in our immediate past commandant of the Marine Corps, and I visited with him extensively on this. And yeah, he did take a lot of heat for this new approach. And I think it's sound, and continue to listen to witnesses in that regard. It was controversial, and I did get an earful from the other side of that issue. But think situations change. The climate of warfare, even island to island and ground warfare, changes, and I think we're on the right track there.
Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi, ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. Sir, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you, Aaron. You're good to give me a platform to speak about our need for getting back to the strength we need to have peace through strength.
This is a Nebulous Media production. Find us wherever you get your podcasts.